The sun rises over Sardis, capital of Lydia, in the year 550 BCE. In the royal treasury, a merchant named Pythes holds something in his palm that will change the world forever. It is small, roughly the size of his thumbnail, weighing about 4.5 grams. One side bears the image of a lion attacking a bull. The other side shows 2 crude punch marks, proof of the hammer that struck it into existence. This is a coin. Not just any coin, but one of the first true coins ever minted, struck from pure gold by order of King Croesus himself. Pythes doesn't yet know it, but this small disc of metal represents an idea more powerful than any army, more enduring than any empire. It is the idea that value can be portable, that trust can be stamped into metal, that wealth itself can travel across mountains and seas without spoiling, without breaking, without being questioned. Before this moment, trade was a puzzle with no elegant solution. Imagine you are a farmer in ancient Anatolia. You have grown wheat, more wheat than your family can eat. Your neighbor raises sheep, but his flock has grown too large for the land he has. A potter down the road has made more jars than she can use. Each of you has something the others want. But how do you make the exchange fair? You offer the neighbor 10 sacks of wheat for 1 sheep. He considers this, but he doesn't need 10 sacks right now. Only 3. The surplus would spoil before he could use it. The potter wants your wheat, but you don't need jars. She would trade with the shepherd, but he has no use for pottery at this moment. The exchange stalls. Trade becomes a complex negotiation of coinciding needs, a fragile web of timing and desire. This was the tyranny of barter. Economists call it the double coincidence of wants, the requirement that 2 parties must each have what the other desires at the exact same time in the exact right quantities. It was inefficient, cumbersome, and limiting. Large-scale commerce was nearly impossible. Ancient civilizations tried to solve this problem with commodity money. In Mesopotamia, they measured value in grain and livestock. The Code of Hammurabi from 1750 BCE lists prices in silver by weight, but also in measures of barley. In Egypt, copper debens served as units of account. Throughout ancient China, cowrie shells passed from hand to hand. These objects had intrinsic value. You could eat the grain, wear the shells, forge tools from the copper. But they still carried problems. Grain spoiled, animals died, shells could be faked, copper was heavy. What the ancient world needed was something that held value consistently, could be divided easily, was durable enough to last indefinitely, and was scarce enough to be worth wanting. They needed something everyone would accept, not because they could eat it or use it, but because they knew others would accept it too. They needed money, true money, and in Lydia they found it. Lydia was perfectly positioned to become the birthplace of coinage. Located in western Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, the kingdom sat at the crossroads of trade routes connecting Greece to the Persian Empire, the Aegean Sea to the Anatolian Plateau. Merchants from a dozen cultures passed through Lydian markets. The kingdom's rivers, particularly the famous Pactolus River, carried flecks of electrum, a naturally occurring alloy of gold and silver, down from the mountains. The Lydians had been using lumps of electrum for trade, but each piece was different. Some contained more gold than silver. Some were purer than others. Merchants had to weigh and test every piece in every transaction, slowing commerce to a crawl. Around 630 BCE, during the reign of King Alyattes, someone in Sardis had a revolutionary idea. What if the king's authority could guarantee the value of these metal lumps? What if the state could stamp them with an official seal, certifying their weight and purity? Then merchants wouldn't need to test every piece. They could simply count them. The first Lydian coins were crude by later standards, irregular lumps of electrum bearing simple designs, lion heads, geometric patterns, abstract symbols, but they worked. They worked because they carried the promise of the king. The stamp said, "This piece contains this much value, and I, the king, guarantee it." Trade in Lydia accelerated. Word spread to neighboring cities. Greek merchants saw the innovation and recognized its potential. Soon, Ionian cities along the coast began minting their own coins, each city marking its currency with its own distinctive symbols. But Electrum presented a problem. The natural alloy's composition varied wildly. One coin might be 70% gold, another only 50%. The uncertain purity meant uncertain value, which defeated the purpose of standardization. Enter Croesus, King Croesus, who ruled Lydia from 561 to 546 BCE, became synonymous with wealth itself. Even today, 26 centuries later, we say someone is rich as Croesus. His solution to the Electrum problem was elegant. Stop using it. Croesus invested in a refining process that could separate gold from silver. Then he minted two parallel series of coins, pure gold and pure silver, establishing a fixed exchange rate between them. This was the world's first bimetallic standard, and it was revolutionary. The gold stater weighed about 8 grams. Its silver counterpart was designed so that 12 silver coins equaled 1 gold coin in value. Both types featured the same design, the forequarters of a lion and bull facing each other, symbolizing strength and fertility, perhaps representing the meeting of Lydia and its neighbors, perhaps the balance of power itself. These coins, called crosids in honor of their creator, spread rapidly across the Mediterranean world. They were universally accepted because their value was guaranteed by a powerful king and, more importantly, because their purity was consistent. A merchant in Athens could accept a Lydian gold stater, confident that it contained the same amount of pure gold as the last one he'd received. For the first time in history, value had become portable in a truly standardized way. Greek mercenaries fighting for Lydian kings demanded payment in these coins. Traders carried them to Cyprus, to Egypt, to the Black Sea coast. An Athenian financial account from 440 BCE records Lydian crosids still being held in the city's treasuries, decades after Croesus himself had fallen to Persian conquest. Because that conquest came swiftly. In 546 BCE, Cyrus the Great of Persia invaded Lydia. Croesus's kingdom fell, but his coins did not. The Persians, recognizing the value of the innovation, continued minting crosids at the Sardis mint for decades. Only around 515 BCE did the Persian king Darius I replace them with his own coinage, the gold daric, named after himself, bearing the image of the great king with his bow. The spread of coinage accelerated. Greek city-states minted their own distinctive coins. Athens struck silver tetradrachms bearing the owl of Athena. Corinth minted coins with Pegasus. Aegina used the sea turtle. Each city's coins carried its identity, its pride, its authority. Trade networks expanded. The Phoenicians carried coins across the Mediterranean. Indian kingdoms minted punch-marked coins. By the 4th century BCE, coinage had spread from Spain to Afghanistan. But amid all this innovation, a question lingered, unspoken but fundamental. Why gold? Why silver? What made these metals so special that an entire civilization would agree to base its wealth upon them? The answer lay not in economics, but in the human heart. And to understand it, we must turn from marketplaces to temples, from merchants to gods. 500 years before Croesus minted his coins, in the land of Egypt, gold was not merely wealth, it was divinity itself. The ancient Egyptians called gold Nebu. They believed it was the flesh of the gods, specifically the flesh of Ra, the sun god who ruled the heavens. Every morning, When the sun rose golden over the Nile, the Egyptians saw Ra's immortal body crossing the sky. Gold's perpetual shine, its refusal to tarnish or corrode, proved its eternal nature. This was not metaphor to them. This was fact. Pharaohs were buried surrounded by gold because they were returning to the realm of the gods. The famous death mask of Tutankhamun weighs 11 kilograms of solid gold, hammered into the idealized face of a god-king. His innermost coffin alone contained 110 kilograms of pure gold. This wasn't ostentatious display. This was spiritual technology, ensuring the pharaoh's transformation into an immortal being. Deep in the eastern desert and in Nubia, the land of gold, Egyptian miners toiled in brutal conditions to extract the divine metal. They used fire setting to crack the rock, heating it intensely, then dousing it with water. They crushed ore with stone hammers and ground it to powder. They washed alluvial deposits in dry riverbeds, carrying the sand to the Nile for processing. King Tushratta of the Mitanni wrote to the Egyptian pharaoh that gold was more plentiful than dirt in Egypt. Egyptian hieroglyphs from 2600 BCE describe gold in quantities that dazzle the imagination. The wealth flowing from Nubia funded the pyramids, the temples, the military campaigns that made Egypt a dominant power for 3,000 years. But why did the Egyptians, and nearly every subsequent civilization, choose gold as the symbol of ultimate value? The answer lies in 3 physical properties and 1 psychological truth. First, beauty. Gold possesses a unique luster, a warm yellow glow unlike any other metal. It doesn't tarnish with age. A gold coin buried for 2,000 years emerges from the earth looking almost as bright as the day it was struck. This permanence made it seem supernatural. Second, rarity. Gold is extraordinarily rare in the Earth's crust, only about 4 parts per billion. All the gold ever mined throughout human history would fit into a cube roughly 21 meters on each side. This scarcity made it valuable by definition. You cannot simply dig up more gold when you need it. It must be found, extracted with great labor, refined with skill. Third, durability. Gold is nearly indestructible by ordinary means. It doesn't rust, doesn't corrode, doesn't burn, doesn't dissolve in most acids. You can melt it and recast it infinitely without losing quality. A gold coin can pass from hand to hand through centuries without degrading. This made gold perfect for storing wealth across time. But the 4th reason, the psychological one, matters most. Gold sparkles. It catches the light. It draws the eye. Humans are evolutionarily programmed to notice shiny objects, a trait that once helped our ancestors spot water and food. Gold triggers this ancient instinct powerfully. Holding gold creates a visceral response, a feeling of importance, of power, of permanence. More than this, gold became valuable because everyone agreed it was valuable. This circular logic, this shared belief, is the foundation of all money. Gold worked as currency not because of its industrial uses, which were minimal in ancient times, but because individuals across cultures independently concluded that gold was special. This consensus made gold a universal language of value. The Persians, who conquered much of the ancient world under Cyrus and Darius, shared the reverence for gold. Persian royal inscriptions describe gold as the symbol of divine favor. The great halls of Persepolis were adorned with gold. The Persian daric, minted from the gold extracted from the conquered Lydian mines, became the international currency of its age. When Alexander the Great conquered the Persian Empire in the 300s and 30s BCE, he seized an estimated 5,000 tons of silver and vast quantities of gold from Persian treasuries. This influx of precious metals into the Greek world, distributed as pay to soldiers, spent on construction projects, invested in trade, sparked an economic boom across the Mediterranean. The Greeks, pragmatic traders and philosophers, thought deeply about money. Aristotle wrote that money should be durable, portable, divisible, and have intrinsic value. Gold and silver met all these criteria perfectly. Greek city-states competed to produce the most beautiful coins, employing skilled artisans to carve the dies. These coins were miniature works of art, tiny sculptures carrying the face of a goddess, the figure of a hero, the emblem of a city. Greek silver, especially Athenian tetradrachms, funded the Parthenon, the plays of Sophocles, the philosophy of Plato. This silver came from the mines of Laurium, where enslaved workers toiled in horrific conditions to extract the metal that built one of history's greatest civilizations. The moral complexity is inescapable. The wealth that created democracy and philosophy rested on suffering. But for the free citizens of Athens, silver meant freedom. It meant the ability to trade without the constant calculation of barter. It meant specialization. One person could focus on making pottery, another on philosophy, another on trade, because money allowed each to exchange their work for what they needed. Money lubricated society, allowing civilization to grow more complex, more sophisticated, more powerful. Yet money carried a danger that would bring down empires. Because if metal itself wasn't truly valuable, if its value came from shared belief, then that belief could be manipulated. If a king or emperor could convince people that coins with less gold or silver were still worth the same amount, he could mint more coins from the same amount of metal. He could in effect create money from nothing. This temptation proved irresistible, and nowhere did this temptation lead to greater catastrophe than in Rome. Rome's rise to dominance was built on silver. In the 3rd century BCE, Rome introduced the denarius, a silver coin that would become the backbone of the Western world's economy for the next 500 years. The original denarius weighed about 4.5 grams and was made of nearly pure silver. This coin financed Rome's transformation from a regional power to a world empire. With it, Rome paid its legions, bought grain to feed its cities, constructed aqueducts and roads, imported silk from China and spices from India. The denarius became the dollar of its age, accepted from Britain to Mesopotamia, from the Sahara to the North Sea. At Rome's peak, during the reign of Emperor Trajan in the 2nd century CE, the empire stretched across 3 continents, encompassing 60 million people. Roman soldiers in Britain were paid in denarii. Roman merchants in Alexandria traded in denarii. Roman tax collectors in Judea demanded denarii. The coin unified this vast realm, transforming diverse peoples into economic participants in a single system. But Rome had an insatiable appetite. Maintaining the legions cost fortunes. Building projects demanded endless funds. Grain subsidies for Rome's population consumed massive resources. Wars drained the treasury. And Rome's conquests, after a certain point, stopped bringing in enough new wealth to pay for themselves. The first crack appeared under Emperor Nero in 64 CE. Nero, facing an economic depression and the enormous cost of rebuilding Rome after the Great Fire, reduced the silver content of the denarius by 20%. The change was subtle enough that most people didn't notice immediately. The coins looked the same. They felt the same. They were officially worth the same. But they contained less silver. This is called debasement, reducing the precious metal content of coins while maintaining their face value. It's a temptation as old as coinage itself. For a while, it worked. Nero was able to mint more coins from the same amount of silver, increasing the money supply and funding his projects. But the additional coins didn't create additional wealth. They simply diluted the value of every existing coin. Prices began to rise. Inflation, slow at first, crept into the Roman economy. Subsequent emperors continued the practice. Trajan debased the denarius slightly, Antoninus Pius debased it more. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor who wrote the Meditations, inherited an empire already suffering from inflation. He tried to maintain the denarius's purity, but economic pressures proved overwhelming. By the reign of Caracalla in the early 3rd century CE, the denarius was only 50% silver. Caracalla's response was to introduce a new coin, the Antoninianus, officially worth 2 denarii, but weighing only 1.5 denarii, and made from even more debased silver. It was monetary sleight of hand, and it accelerated the crisis. The real catastrophe came in the mid-3rd century. Between 235 and 284 CE, Rome experienced the crisis of the 3rd century, a period of near collapse. During these 50 years, more than 50 emperors claimed the throne, most dying violently. Barbarian invasions ravaged the provinces. Plague swept through the cities. Civil wars erupted constantly. The empire fragmented into competing states. To pay for this chaos, emperors debased the currency relentlessly. By 268 CE, the denarius contained only 0.5% silver, essentially a bronze coin with a thin silver wash that wore off quickly. The Antoninianus fared little better. The result was hyperinflation. Prices rose by 1,000%. A pound of gold, which had been worth 40 gold auri, or 1,000 denarii in earlier times, was now worth tens of thousands of increasingly worthless denarii. Merchants refused to accept the imperial currency. Trade collapsed into barter. The economic networks that had made the Roman Empire rich and powerful dissolved. Soldiers, paid in worthless coins, demanded higher wages or payment in gold, which was still trusted. The only people who would accept the debased currency were the empire's own officials, forced to take it as pay. Everyone else tried to avoid it. Imagine being a farmer in the Roman Empire during this period. You grow wheat. You need to sell it to buy tools, to pay taxes. But the coins the tax collector demands are different from the coins merchants will accept. The official exchange rate bears no relation to reality. You watch your savings evaporate as prices double, then double again. Trust in authority collapses. Trust in money collapses. Society itself begins to fragment. In 301 CE, Emperor Diocletian attempted to solve the crisis by decree. He issued the edict on maximum prices, fixing the prices of more than 1,000 goods and services and threatening death to anyone who charged more. It was history's most ambitious price control program. It failed spectacularly. Producers stopped selling goods at the mandated prices. Black markets flourished. The edict, unenforceable and economically nonsensical, was quietly abandoned. You cannot decree value into existence any more than you can decree rain. The fundamental problem was that Rome had destroyed the trust that made money function. Money is not metal. Money is belief. Money is the shared agreement that this object can be exchanged for goods and services. When the emperor repeatedly broke the promise, when coins stamped official currency contained almost no silver, people stopped believing. The Western Roman Empire never fully recovered. The economy shifted from monetized trade back to feudal barter relationships. Large estates became self-sufficient, producing everything they needed rather than trading. Cities shrank. Learning declined. The infrastructure of commerce decayed. We call what came next the Dark Ages. But it wasn't just the barbarian invasions that caused Rome's fall. It was also the monetary collapse, the betrayal of trust, the inflation that destroyed the economic bonds holding the empire together. But in the East, one man saw the lesson clearly, and he built something that would last 1,000 years. The year is 312 CE. Constantine the Great stands at the Milvian Bridge outside Rome, preparing for the battle that will make him sole emperor of the Roman world. According to legend, he sees a vision in the sky, a cross of light with the words, In this sign, conquer. But Constantine's most enduring legacy would not be religious. It would be economic. After securing power, Constantine recognized that Rome's monetary system was shattered beyond repair. The old denarius had become worthless. The Antoninianus inspired no confidence. The empire's economy ran on a chaotic mix of bronze tokens, debased silver, and the increasingly scarce gold aureus. Constantine's solution was bold. Abandon the pretense of silver currency entirely and create a new gold standard. In 312 CE, he introduced the solidus, a gold coin weighing precisely 4.5 grams, struck at a rate of 72 coins to the Roman pound. Unlike the constantly debased silver coins, the solidus would maintain consistent weight and purity. Constantine made it the foundation of the imperial monetary system. Where did he get the gold? From conquered enemies, from confiscated pagan temple treasuries, from new taxes payable in gold. Constantine was ruthless in gathering the metal necessary to make his monetary reform real. The solidus worked because Constantine made a promise and kept it. For the first time in generations, an emperor issued coins that maintained their value. The gold content remained consistent. The weight stayed standard. When a merchant received a solidus, they knew exactly what they had. More than this, Constantine moved the capital of the empire from Rome to Byzantium, renamed Constantinople. This new Rome in the east would become the Byzantine Empire, and the solidus would become its beating heart. For the next 7 centuries, the Byzantine solidus maintained its weight and purity with astonishing consistency. This stability was unprecedented. Think about it. 700 years. Empires rose and fell. Languages shifted. Religions transformed entire civilizations. But the solidus remained essentially unchanged, a golden constant in a turbulent world. The coin circulated far beyond Byzantine borders. Arab traders called it the dinar and copied its design. Vikings hoarded Byzantine solidi in Scandinavia. Merchants in Britain, India, and China accepted it as payment. The solidus became the dollar of the medieval world, not just a currency but a standard of value, a measure of wealth, a symbol of stability. Look at the designs. Early solidi feature emperors in classical Roman style, laurel wreaths, military dress, the iconography of power. But as Christianity became central to Byzantine identity, the coins reflected this. Jesus Christ himself appeared on solidi, his face gazing out from the gold. Angels replaced classical victory figures. Crosses became prominent. The coins were not just money. They were theology rendered in metal, promises not just from emperors, but from God himself. This fusion of religious and monetary authority gave the solidus extraordinary power. To reject it was to reject not just the emperor's guarantee, but divine sanction. The Byzantine Empire understood that money's value rested on faith, and what better foundation for faith than actual faith? Trade flourished. Constantinople's markets buzzed with merchants from 3 continents. Silk arrived from China along the Silk Road. Spices came from India and Arabia. Grain shipped from Egypt. Furs came down from the Russian principalities. And all of it was bought and sold in solidi, the common language of commerce binding these distant lands together. The Byzantine mint at Constantinople produced millions of coins. Smaller mints operated in provinces, though the capital maintained primary control. The government strictly regulated coin production, understanding that monetary stability was political stability. Some emperors tried to debase the solidus. Michael IV in the 11th century gradually reduced its gold content. Constantine IX accelerated the decline. By the reign of Alexios, the first Komnenos in the late 11th century, the solidus had been debased to the point of crisis. Alexios abolished it in 1092, replacing it with the hyperpyron, a reformed coin meant to restore trust. But the lesson was clear. The moment monetary discipline collapsed, economic and political collapse followed. The debasement of the solidus correlated precisely with the Byzantine Empire's decline. When the gold remained pure, the empire remained strong. When emperors succumbed to the temptation of easy money, disaster loomed. The solidus longevity proved something profound. Good money requires political commitment. An emperor can promise a stable currency, but that promise must be kept year after year, decade after decade, century after century. The moment the promise breaks, trust evaporates. Constantinople fell to the Ottoman Turks in 1453, ending the Byzantine Empire. But the solidus influence persisted. Islamic gold dinars followed its standard. European kingdoms remembered its lessons. The very word soldier derives from soldus, those who fought for the gold coin. Yet even as the solidus represented stability, a revolution was brewing in the merchant cities of Italy. Because while emperors struck coins, merchants were inventing something that would ultimately prove more powerful than metal itself. They were inventing paper wealth. Venice, 1397 CE. Giovanni di Bicci de' Medici opens a small bank in Florence. It is not the first bank in Italy, not by centuries, but it will become the most famous, and its innovations will reshape the financial world. Medieval Italy was a patchwork of independent city-states, each competing for trade dominance. Venice commanded the sea routes to the east. Genoa controlled North African trade. Florence produced fine wool cloth and controlled the trade routes north through the Alps. And these cities, wealthy from commerce, needed ways to manage that wealth. The old ways, carrying sacks of coins from one city to another, were dangerous and impractical. A merchant travelling from Venice to London with enough gold to purchase a shipload of wool risked robbery at every stage. Seas could be rough. Bandits lurked in mountain passes, and even trust between partners was tested by temptation. So the Italian merchants innovated. They created the bill of exchange, a paper document promising payment at a future date in a different city. A Venetian merchant could deposit gold coins at a bank in Venice and receive a bill of exchange. He would travel to London carrying only this paper. Upon arrival, he would present the bill to the bank's London office, which would pay him in English pounds. The paper was worthless to robbers, but invaluable to the merchant. This was not merely convenient, it was revolutionary. For the first time, value became truly immaterial. The bill of exchange was not money backed by gold, it was money backed by trust. Trust that the bank would honour its promise. Trust that the network of correspondents and agents would function. Trust that reputation mattered more than immediate profit. The Medici Bank perfected this system. By the time Giovanni's son Cosimo took over in 1429, the bank had branches in Rome, Venice, Geneva, Bruges, and London. A web of relationships connected these offices, allowing money to flow across Europe without physically moving metal. The Medici also pioneered double-entry bookkeeping, a system of accounting where every transaction is recorded twice, once as a debit, once as a credit. This allowed them to track complex operations across multiple branches, ensuring accuracy and enabling them to detect fraud or error quickly. Every florin was accounted for, its movement traced through ledgers that would be comprehensible to a modern accountant. But the Medici's greatest innovation was conceptual. They understood that money is information. Think about what a bill of exchange represents. It says, someone in Venice has gold. Someone in London owes them an equivalent amount in English pounds. The paper itself has no intrinsic value. Its value lies in what it represents, a claim on real wealth somewhere else. This abstraction, this separation of money from physical objects, was breathtaking in its implications. It meant that money could move faster than any ship. A message could travel from Venice to London in weeks, executing a transfer that would take months to complete with physical gold. Information moved at the speed of horses and sailing ships. But that was still faster than bullion could travel. It meant that credit could expand. If a bank could write bills of exchange faster than customers redeemed them, it effectively created money, lending out more than it actually possessed, trusting that not everyone would demand payment simultaneously. This is the fundamental principle of fractional reserve banking, and it originated in medieval Italy. And it meant that banking families became powerful. The Medici lent money to the Pope, to the King of England, to the Duke of Burgundy, to merchant ventures across Europe. These loans created relationships, dependencies, obligations. The Medici didn't just store wealth, they manufactured influence. The system was not without risk. In the 14th century, the Bardi and Peruzzi banking families of Florence collapsed when King Edward III of England defaulted on enormous loans he had taken to finance the 100 Years' War. The bankruptcies sent shockwaves through the Italian financial system, demonstrating that even the most sophisticated banks remained vulnerable to political chaos. The Medici learned from this. They diversified their lending, spread their risk across multiple ventures, and maintained good relationships with the powerful. But they also understood a darker lesson. Sometimes refusing to lend was the best business decision, even if it angered kings. Venice contributed its own innovations. Venetian merchants developed maritime insurance, allowing traders to hedge against the risk of shipwrecks and piracy. For a fee, an insurer would promise to cover losses if a ship sank or was captured. This invention transformed international trade, making it possible to invest in ventures that had once been far too risky. The Venetians also created the first government bonds. The city-state needed money to fight wars and build infrastructure, so it borrowed from its citizens, promising to repay with interest. These bonds could be bought and sold, creating a secondary market where investors traded debt like any other commodity. Government bonds would eventually become one of the largest asset classes in the world. Genoa developed similar instruments. The Bank of St. George, founded in 1407, was effectively a public-private partnership that managed Genoese government debt and collected taxes to pay bondholders. It was a primitive central bank, demonstrating that financial innovation could serve both private profit and public finance. All of these innovations rested on a foundation that was invisible but essential: trust. The bills of exchange, the insurance policies, the government bonds. None of these had value unless people believed they would be honored. The Italian merchants understood that their most valuable asset was reputation. A bank that defaulted on a bill of exchange would find itself excluded from the network. No other banks would honor its paper. Merchants would refuse to do business with it. In a world where most transactions happened between people who knew each other or knew each other's reputations, trust was enforced by the threat of exclusion. But this system also created a peculiar paradox. The more successful the merchant banks became, the more debt they created. And debt is just future claims on wealth. As long as everyone believed the wealth existed, the system worked beautifully. But if confidence wavered, if people began to doubt that the banks could actually pay what they owed, the entire structure could collapse in moments. The Medici Bank eventually failed in 1494, brought down by bad loans to European monarchs and internal mismanagement after Cosimo's death. But the system they helped create did not fail. It expanded. By the 16th century, Amsterdam had become the new center of financial innovation. The Amsterdam Stock Exchange, founded in 1602, created the first modern securities market. The Dutch East India Company issued shares that could be traded daily, allowing ordinary citizens to invest in voyages to Asia. Wealth became fractional, divisible, accessible to those beyond the aristocracy. Letters of credit evolved into banknotes. Merchants in Amsterdam could deposit gold at the Amsterdam Wisselbank, exchange bank, and receive paper notes representing that gold. These notes circulated as currency, passing from hand to hand, their value backed by the promise that they could be redeemed for gold at any time. But most people never redeemed them. Why bother when the paper was more convenient than metal? The gold sat in vaults, mostly untouched, while the notes did all the work. The bank realized it could issue more notes than it had gold to cover, lending out the difference and earning interest. As long as not everyone demanded their gold simultaneously, the system worked perfectly. This was the birth of modern banking. Money no longer needed to be a physical object. It could be information, promises, claims on future wealth. The vault full of gold became a reserve, a backstop, proof of solvency. But the real wealth existed in the ledgers, in the networks of trust, in the velocity of credit flowing through the European economy. The Italian merchants had discovered how to create money from nothing but confidence. And confidence, it turned out, was the hardest currency to keep. Because while Europe was building these intricate systems of paper wealth across the Atlantic Ocean, ships were arriving in Spanish ports, carrying treasure on a scale that would destroy an empire. Potosí, 1545. High in the Andes Mountains of modern-day Bolivia, at an altitude of 4,000 meters where the air is thin and cold, an indigenous man named Diego Hualpa discovers something that will change the world. He is searching for a lost llama when he uproots a bush and sees beneath it a vein of pure silver gleaming in the rock. The mountain is called Cerro Rico, the Rich Mountain. It contains one of the largest silver deposits ever discovered, and for the next 3 centuries, it will pour silver into the Spanish Empire at a rate that seems impossible, miraculous, catastrophic. Spain had conquered the Aztec and Inca empires in the early 16th century, driven by rumors of gold cities and wealthy civilizations. Hernán Cortés took Mexico in 1521. Francisco Pizarro conquered Peru in 1532. The conquistadors found gold. Yes, they looted temples and melted down sacred artifacts. But the real treasure was silver. The Spanish established mines across their New World empire. Potosí became the largest and most productive. At its peak in the early 1600s, Potosí was one of the world's largest cities, with a population exceeding 200,000 people. Larger than London, larger than Paris. The entire city existed for one purpose: to extract silver and ship it to Spain. The work was brutal beyond imagination. Indigenous people and African slaves were forced into the mines through the meter system, a labor draft that required communities to send a quota of workers. These men descended into the mountain through narrow shafts, sometimes working in spaces so confined they couldn't stand. They dug by candlelight, breathed toxic dust, and died by the thousands. Accidents crushed workers. Toxic mercury, used in refining, poisoned them slowly. The altitude and cold killed the weakest. Historians estimate that between 1545 and 1825, 8 million indigenous people died in the mines of Potosí. The mountain consumed lives and exhaled wealth, but it did exhale wealth. Between 1545 and 1660, Potosí produced approximately 41,000 tons of pure silver. Mexican mines added tens of thousands of tons more. The treasure fleets that sailed from Veracruz and Portobello to Seville carried silver in quantities that dwarfed anything Europe had seen. In 1550, Spain's silver imports were about 300 tons per year. By 1600, they had reached 2,700 tons annually. This silver flooded into the Spanish economy, then spread across Europe as Spain bought goods, fought wars, and maintained its empire. And it destroyed Spain. This is the great paradox of Spanish power. The more treasure Spain received, the poorer it became. How is this possible? The answer is inflation, specifically the price revolution of the 16th century. When the first silver ships arrived in Spain, the sudden increase in money supply initially stimulated the economy. Prices rose, but gradually. Merchants made profits. The Spanish crown, enriched by taxation of silver imports, funded ambitious projects. The Armada, wars in Italy and the Netherlands, construction of the Escorial Palace. But the silver kept coming. and coming and coming. Remember, money is not wealth. Money is a claim on wealth, a way to measure and transfer it. The actual wealth of an economy consists of goods and services, food, cloth, housing, labor, art. When the money supply increases faster than the actual production of goods and services, each unit of money buys less. Prices rise. This is inflation. Spain's silver imports quintupled, while its production of actual goods increased much more slowly. The result was predictable. Prices in Spain rose by 500% over the 16th century. Wages rose too, but more slowly, meaning workers could afford less even as nominal incomes increased. Spanish producers couldn't compete. A sword made in Toledo cost more than a sword imported from Germany. Spanish wool cloth cost more than English cloth. Spanish merchants found it cheaper to import finished goods than to manufacture them domestically. Spanish manufacturing collapsed. The crown's expenses grew faster than its income. Yes, silver taxes provided enormous revenue, but wars cost even more. Spain fought the Ottoman Empire in the Mediterranean, battled Protestant rebels in the Netherlands, launched the disastrous Armada against England, intervened in France's religious wars. The American silver financed these ventures, but never quite enough. Philip II, who ruled Spain from 1556 to 1598, declared bankruptcy 4 times. His son, Philip III, declared bankruptcy twice. Philip IV declared bankruptcy 3 times. Despite possessing the largest silver mines in the world, the Spanish crown was constantly broke. How? Because the silver flowed through Spain like water through a pipe. It arrived in Seville, the crown took its share, and the rest immediately flowed out to pay for imports, to service debts to German and Italian bankers, to fund armies across Europe. Spain became a conduit, not a reservoir. The wealth passed through, enriching everyone else, leaving Spain with nothing but inflation. The economist Adam Smith would later observe this phenomenon and articulate the mercantilist paradox. Accumulating gold and silver does not make a nation wealthy. Only productive capacity creates real wealth. Spain learned this lesson the hard way. The silver's impact extended far beyond Spain. It flowed into European markets, increasing the money supply across the continent. The price revolution affected England, France, the Netherlands, Germany. Prices rose everywhere, destabilizing traditional economic relationships. Fixed rents that had supported landlords for generations became inadequate as inflation eroded their value. Social hierarchies shifted. The silver also flowed east. European merchants used it to buy silk from China, spices from the Moluccas, jewels from India. The Spanish even established a direct trade route from Mexico to the Philippines. The famous Manila galleons that carried silver to Manila and returned with Chinese porcelain, silk, and other Asian goods. By some estimates, half of all American silver eventually ended up in China. Why? Because China ran a massive trade surplus with Europe. Europeans wanted Chinese goods desperately: silk, porcelain, tea. But China had little interest in European products. So trade required payment in silver, which China accepted because its monetary system was based on silver rather than gold. This global silver circuit connected the Americas, Europe, and Asia into a single world economy for the first time. The mines of Potosi financed not just Spanish wars but Chinese manufacturing, Dutch trading ventures, Ottoman military campaigns. Silver became the grease lubricating global commerce. But for Spain, the story ended in decline. By the 17th century, silver production from Potosi was falling. The richest deposits had been exhausted. Mining required deeper shafts and more labor for diminishing returns. The treasure fleets became targets for pirates and rival nations. England, France, and the Dutch Republic all attacked Spanish shipping, capturing galleons laden with silver. Spain's golden age ended not in glory, but in exhaustion, bankruptcy, and demographic collapse. The empire that had conquered half the world for treasure found itself impoverished by that very treasure. The lesson was clear, though few learned it. Abundance is not the same as wealth. True prosperity comes not from possessing money, but from productive use of resources, from creating goods and services that others want, from building institutions that foster innovation and trade. But even as Spain's silver empire declined, another revolution was beginning. One that would make even the flood of American silver seem quaint. Because across the world in China, a civilization was experimenting with money that had no metal content at all. They were printing it. 500 years before Europe would seriously consider paper money, the Song dynasty government issues the first government-backed paper currency, the jiaozi. It begins almost accidentally, born from necessity in a region short of copper coins. Chinese merchants in Sichuan had been using privately issued paper certificates for decades. They worked like the Italian bills of exchange. A merchant would deposit metal coins with a trusted firm and receive a paper receipt. This receipt could be exchanged for coins or passed to another merchant in payment for goods. It was more convenient than carrying heavy copper strings. But private paper certificates had problems. Some firms issued more certificates than they had coins to cover. Others went bankrupt, leaving their notes worthless. Fraud was common. The government, recognizing both the utility and the danger of paper money, took control of the system. The jiaozi was revolutionary. Paper representing value, backed by government authority rather than by a specific reserve of metal. The notes featured intricate designs to prevent counterfeiting, multiple colors, complex seals, official signatures. Detailed records tracked every note issued. Strict penalties awaited counterfeiters, typically death. Initially, the jiaozi was successful. It circulated in Sichuan, facilitating trade in a region where coin shortages had hampered commerce. The government maintained discipline, issuing limited quantities and redeeming notes reliably. But the temptation proved irresistible. By the 1070s, the Song government faced military threats from northern nomadic tribes and needed money to maintain large armies. Rather than raise unpopular taxes or debase the coinage, they simply printed more paper money. Unlike metal coins, which required silver or copper to produce, paper could be manufactured at minimal cost. The printing presses ran continuously. The result, predictably, was inflation. Prices rose as the money supply expanded faster than actual wealth. Merchants began to refuse paper money or demanded more of it in exchange for goods. Trust in the currency eroded. The Song dynasty tried to restore confidence by issuing new series of notes, declaring old notes worthless, and establishing redemption dates. These measures only accelerated the collapse of confidence. When people learned their money had expiration dates, they rushed to spend it immediately, creating a velocity spiral that sent prices skyrocketing. By the 13th century, Song paper money had lost most of its value. The succeeding Yuan dynasty, established by Mongol conquerors, tried again with paper currency, the Chao. Kublai Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan, made paper money mandatory throughout his vast empire, which stretched from China to Persia. Marco Polo, the Venetian merchant who visited China in the 1270s and 1280s, was astounded by what he saw. He wrote, "The emperor makes his money from the bark of mulberry trees. These are made into paper resembling ordinary paper, but black. It is stamped with the imperial seal, and anyone who counterfeits it would be punished with death. When this paper money is ready, the emperor orders the production of money for the entire empire. Everyone throughout the empire accepts it willingly for payment." To Polo's European mind, this was sorcery. How could paper be money? In Venice, money meant gold or silver, objects with intrinsic value. Yet here in China, pieces of paper circulated as currency by imperial decree alone. Kublai Khan's system worked initially because it was backed by the Khan's absolute authority and severe penalties for refusal. merchants who declined paper money faced execution. Monopolies on salt and other commodities generated revenue in paper money, creating necessary demand. The government accepted taxes in paper, further legitimizing it. But the Mongols, facing constant warfare on their frontiers, eventually fell into the same trap as the Song. They printed money to fund military campaigns. The cow's value declined rapidly. By the late 1300s, hyperinflation gripped China. The Yuan dynasty collapsed in 1368, replaced by the Ming dynasty, which abandoned paper money entirely and returned to silver and copper coinage. China's experiment with paper money ended in failure, but not before the idea had spread westward. European merchants who travelled to China or heard tales from those who did began to contemplate paper currency. But Europe wasn't ready. The technology, the institutions, the social trust necessary to make paper money work didn't yet exist. Instead, Europe continued relying on metal coinage, supplemented by bills of exchange and bank deposits. Gold and silver flowed through the Spanish and Portuguese empires. The Dutch and British competed for trade dominance. Every transaction ultimately traced back to metal: the gold sovereign, the silver thaler, the copper penny. The first European experiment with government-issued paper money came in Sweden in 1661, when the Stockholm Banco issued notes redeemable for silver. The bank's founder, Johann Palmstruch, quickly overissued notes. The bank collapsed, and Palmstruch was imprisoned. Europe had learned China's lesson the hard way. But the idea wouldn't die. In 1694, the Bank of England was founded, partly to issue paper notes backed by gold reserves. These notes circulated alongside coins, and crucially, the bank maintained discipline. It didn't print more notes than it could redeem in gold. Trust slowly built. By the 18th century, paper currency was spreading across Europe and to European colonies. Colonial Massachusetts issued paper money in 1690 to pay soldiers. France experimented with paper money under John Law's Mississippi Company in the 1710s, a scheme that ended in spectacular collapse and reinforced European skepticism about paper currency not fully backed by metal. The American Revolution was partly financed by printing continental currency, paper money issued by the Continental Congress. The phrase, "not worth a continental," entered American English as a description of worthlessness, because the Continental Congress printed money with abandon, creating hyperinflation that destroyed the currency's value. Yet despite these failures, the trend was clear. Money was becoming increasingly abstract. The golden solidus that Constantine had minted, solid, heavy, tangible, was giving way to paper promises, ledger entries, banknotes. Why? Because paper money, when managed responsibly, offered immense advantages. It was lightweight, portable, easily divisible. A paper note worth 100 gold coins was much easier to carry than the actual coins. Paper facilitated larger transactions, enabled more complex commerce, reduced the physical dangers of transporting wealth, but paper money required something that metal money didn't: trust in institutions. Gold is gold, whether the emperor who minted it is trustworthy or not. Paper is valuable only if people believe the issuing authority will honor it. This shift, from trusting objects to trusting institutions, represents one of civilization's greatest leaps. The 19th century saw the gradual formalization of this trust. Central banks emerged, taking responsibility for managing money supplies. The gold standard arose, with paper notes explicitly redeemable for gold at fixed rates. Britain adopted a formal gold standard in 1821. Other nations followed. By the late 1800s, most major economies operated on the gold standard, meaning their paper currencies were backed by and convertible to gold. This system provided stability. Governments couldn't simply print money because they needed gold reserves to back new notes. International trade functioned smoothly because currencies had fixed values in gold. The gold standard facilitated the massive expansion of global commerce in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. But it also imposed constraints. During economic downturns, governments couldn't increase money supplies to stimulate recovery. During crises, the need to maintain gold reserves could force painful deflation. The gold standard's rigidity contributed to the severity of the Great Depression in the 1930s. One by one, nations abandoned the gold standard. Britain left in 1931. The United States left the domestic gold standard in 1933, though it maintained gold convertibility for international transactions until 1971, when President Nixon ended the Bretton Woods system that had tied the dollar to gold. Since 1971, the major global currencies have been fiat money, currency valuable by government decree alone, backed by no commodity, convertible to nothing except belief in the issuing government's authority and stability. This is the ultimate abstraction. Money as pure information, pure promise, pure trust. It is money as Constantine might have understood it, not gold itself, but faith stamped into form. Except now the form isn't even physical. It's numbers in computers, electrons flowing through fiber optic cables, entries in databases scattered across the planet. The question Kublai Khan faced in the 13th century remains the question we face now. When money becomes only a promise, who guards the truth? 700 years lie between Croesus of Lydia and Constantine of Rome. Another 700 separate Constantine from Kublai Khan. 700 more bring us to our present moment. Across these 21 centuries, the story of money is the story of human trust, its creation, its betrayal, its renewal. Stand in the ruins of Sardis, where grass grows over the foundations of the royal palace. The city where coins were born is now a whisper, stones scattered across Turkish countryside. The empire of Croesus lasted barely 2 generations. His coins endured for centuries. Walk the fields outside Rome, where the Milvian Bridge once stood. Constantine won his empire here, but that empire split, shrank, and vanished. The solidus he created outlasted his dynasty, his religion's dominance, the very concept of Rome itself. Climb the cold heights of Cerro Rico above Potosi. The mountain is hollow now, honeycomb with tunnels, its silver long since extracted and dispersed across the planet. 8 million people died to fill Spanish coffers. Spain spent the wealth and collapsed anyway. But the silver still circulates, melted down and recast countless times, present in jewelry, electronics, solar panels, unaware of the blood that bought it from stone. The patterns repeat with eerie consistency. First comes scarcity. Metal is rare, so metal becomes valuable. The physicality of gold and silver gives them power. You can hold wealth in your hand, hide it in the earth, pass it to your children. Then comes standardization. Coins replace raw metal. Kings guarantee purity and weight. Trade accelerates because trust becomes portable. Money transforms from thing to symbol. This coin represents value, backed by authority. Next comes expansion. Empires grow, trade routes lengthen, money flows to distant lands. The reach of currency marks the reach of power. Roman denarii in Britain, Byzantine solidi in Scandinavia, Spanish silver in China. Money goes where power cannot, carrying influence beyond armies. Then comes temptation. Emperors face expensive wars, costly projects, popular demands. Metal is scarce, melting and minting is slow, but debasement is easy. Reduce the silver content, keep the face value the same, mint more coins. It works, briefly. Finally comes collapse. Inflation erodes purchasing power. Trust evaporates. People reject the currency. Trade retreats to barter. Economic complexity crashes. Civilizations don't die because they run out of money. They die because money ceases to mean anything. And from the ashes, someone begins again. Constantine creates the solidus. The Medici create banking networks. The Song dynasty creates paper money. Each innovation responds to the previous collapse, trying to restore the essential function, enabling strangers to exchange goods without violence, facilitating cooperation beyond kinship, making civilization possible. Because this is money's ultimate purpose. It is not wealth itself, but a technology for transferring trust across space and time. The Lydian merchant who accepted Croesus's coin trusted that others would accept it too. The Byzantine trader who took a solidus in Constantinople trusted she could spend it in Alexandria months later. The Dutch investor who bought shares in the VOC trusted the company would return profits years hence. Money is frozen trust, portable trust, trust as technology. This explains both its power and its fragility. When trust is strong, money enables miracles. The Athenian silver that funded the Parthenon, the Medici gold that financed Renaissance art, the Spanish silver that connected 3 continents. The trust was never perfect. Ask the miners dying in Laurium or Potosi. But it functioned, enabling civilization to grow more complex, more capable, more creative. When trust breaks, money becomes worthless instantly. No amount of imperial decree can force people to value what they've learned to distrust. The Romans discovered this when their debased denarii stopped buying food. The Spanish learned it when their silver mountains couldn't save them from poverty. Every hyperinflation, every currency collapse, every monetary crisis traces back to broken trust. Modern money is pure trust. The dollar bills in your wallet are valuable because the United States government says so, and because millions of people believe it. The numbers in your bank account exist only as entries in databases. Cryptocurrency represents trust in mathematics and blockchain technology. We have completed the journey from physical gold to pure abstraction. Money as shared belief alone. This should terrify us, and yet it also demonstrates humanity's extraordinary capacity for cooperation. That billions of people can agree that paper and electronic ledgers represent value, that we can structure our entire civilization on these abstractions, that the system works day after day despite having no foundation except our collective belief. This is remarkable. The ancient Egyptians believed gold was the flesh of gods. In a sense, they were right. Not because Ra lived in the metal, but because money has always been a leap of faith, a willingness to trust in something larger than ourselves. When Constantine stamped Christ on his coins, he understood this. When the Medici wrote bills of exchange, they understood this. When China printed paper money, they understood this, and learned what happens when faith is betrayed. We stand now at another transition. Physical money is disappearing. Central banks explore digital currencies. Private cryptocurrencies challenge state monopolies on money creation. The very concept of currency is fragmenting into thousands of tokens, coins, and digital assets, each representing someone's vision of how trust should be structured. Some of these experiments will fail spectacularly, destroying the wealth of those who believed in them. Others may succeed, creating new forms of money that would be incomprehensible to Croesus or Constantine, or even to economists from 50 years ago. But the fundamental pattern will remain. Whatever form money takes, it will depend on trust. Trust that others will accept it. Trust that its value will persist. Trust that the rules won't change arbitrarily. Trust that promises will be kept. And trust, as every civilization has learned, is both the easiest thing to lose and the hardest thing to rebuild. The merchant in Sardis, under the rising sun, held that first coin not knowing he witnessed a revolution. The metal in his hand would reshape humanity's relationship with value, with trade, with civilization itself. His name is forgotten. His city is ruins. His language is dead. But his coin's legacy endures. In every transaction you make, every price you compare, every saving you set aside, every debt you repay, you participate in the same revolution that began when someone first stamped authority into metal and declared, This has value because we agree it does. Empires fall, coins fade, mountains of silver crumble to dust. But belief endures. In the foundations of forgotten markets, in the mathematics of modern finance, in the dreams of those who imagine money's future, another coin waits, ready to start the cycle again. Because humanity needs money not as wealth, but as trust made manifest. And trust, for all its fragility, is the most renewable resource we possess. The next episode of Empire of Gold will explore what happened when that trust became paper, when paper became numbers, when numbers became light. We'll witness the birth of central banking, the gold standard's rise and fall, the creation of the Federal Reserve, the Bretton Woods Agreement, and the moment in 1971 when the last link between money and metal was severed forever. That story, the story of fiat currency, debt-based money, and the modern financial system, is the story of how trust became not just the backing for money, but money itself, how we learned to create wealth from nothing but promises, and how those promises sometimes shatter with consequences that destroy nations. The coin that built civilization also built the trap we now inhabit, a world where every dollar, every euro, every yen exists, only because someone somewhere owes something to someone else. Where national debts count in the trillions, where financial derivatives exceed the value of all physical goods on earth, where crisis seems always one bad day away, but also a world of unprecedented prosperity, where more people live better than at any point in human history, where poverty is declining, where innovation accelerates. This is the paradox of modern money. It is both our greatest tool and our greatest vulnerability. Understanding how we arrived here, through the markets of Lydia, the legions of Rome, the ships of Venice, the mines of Potosi, the printing presses of China, helps us see where we might go next. Because the patterns of the past are not merely history, they are prophecy. Every empire that debased its currency faced inflation and collapse. Every monetary innovation that ignored the foundation of trust failed eventually. Every period of sound money corresponded with prosperity and stability. These are not coincidences. They are laws as reliable as gravity. Our modern world, with its fiat currencies and fractional reserve banking and quantitative easing and cryptocurrency and all the complexity of 21st century finance, operates on the same fundamental principles that governed Croesus's first coins. Value requires agreement. Money requires trust. Wealth requires production. When we forget these lessons, when we believe we can print prosperity, spend our way to wealth, or create money without constraint, we repeat the mistakes of Rome, of Song Dynasty China, of every civilization that thought it had transcended the ancient rules. The coin that built civilization contains a warning as much as a promise. Use money wisely, maintain trust carefully, and it enables miracles. Abuse it, debase it, destroy confidence in it, and collapse follows as surely as night follows day. Standing in Sardes amid the ruins, you can almost hear the echo of that first hammer striking metal, creating the template that would shape millennia. That sound still reverberates through every stock exchange, every central bank, every transaction that happens in the shadow of that original innovation. The merchant under the rising sun held more than metal. He held the future, and that future, for better or worse, is now.